this is what attendees are seeing right now. But they will see before we start to broadcast. Okay, just so everyone knows.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see it also on my screen.
Okay, so we're broadcasting now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of the United Nations Forum on Responsible Business and Human Rights, and to the session of Present and Future of National Action Plans in Asia through the eyes of 4 business and human rights champions. I'm Dory from Insight Pact, supporting this webinar to make sure that things run smoothly from a technical standpoint. And we'll start the session in just 1 minute. And just so you know, if you have any questions during or comments during the session, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Only those questions in the Q&A window will be considered for answering if time permits. We're looking forward today to welcoming all our speakers on this panel. Great, looks like we have a lot of people joining us now. And so I will give the floor to Livio Sarandrea, who is the Business and Human Rights Advisor for UNDP, and the webinar will begin now.
Thank you, Dory, and a very warm welcome to the session Present and Future of NAPS in Asia through the eyes of 4 business and human rights champions. Like many of you, I connected with the opening plenary, and in the opening plenary, we have heard a lot about the importance of policies that come from government. We've heard a lot about the importance of making sure that these policies look at the specific risks that come with COVID-19 and comes for an enhanced expectation somehow from the governments. I've said this for this session, 2 overall objectives. One is the typical objective that we have for the NAPS session that we typically have on the Asia Forum, is to review progress on NAPS in 4 countries specifically, perhaps if we have time in more countries around the region. So we'll look at the progress of these policies, but we will also more specifically at how okay, sorry. I think there was a problem with my mic. I'm sorry. I'll start from the beginning and by wishing a very warm welcome to everyone to the session Present and Future of NAPS in Asia. As I was explaining, I connected with, like most of you, I hope, to the opening plenary, where there was repeated mention to the importance of policies from governments, policies that look also at the specific risks that come with the pandemics like the one of COVID-19. So we'll reflect a little bit on that today, also on the enhanced or specific expectations the government should be setting for business to operate responsibly during times of crisis. I set for these sessions 2 overall objectives. One is the typical one that we have during the NAPS session, which has become a standard session in the Asia Forum. So I'm going to ask the panelists to reflect on progress. So progress in 4 specific countries that are in focus today, but perhaps if we have time in other countries in Asia. The second aspect that we would like to review today is how the lessons that we all have learned during the COVID-19 crisis are being factored into these policies that are coming from governments. How are the NAPs able or not able, or how should they be transformed to address also the specific risks that come with crisis? To help me in unpacking these challenges and opportunities, I'm joined today by an exceptional virtual panel of speakers. We will start with the 4 champions in the title. I've decided to give a little bit of attention to those people who are actually driving the NAPS processes in the regions. And these 4 champions that I've asked me today to join all of us are actually 4 women, which makes me particularly happy. 4 women that I worked with very closely in the last 20 years. It's been a pleasure to work with all of them on the drafting of the NAPs in Pakistan, Thailandia, Mongolia, and Japan. 3 of these 4 champions are from government institutions, and the one from Japan is from civil society, but all of them have been strong drivers of these processes. In the second segment of our session, we will bring in 2 global reflections. We will be bringing global reflection from Ambassador Tapiola from the EU delegation, and a global reflection from Dante Pesce, who needs probably no presentation to those listening to this session. Dante is a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. After the reflection, we'll open the floor for comments and reflections from stakeholders with an emphasis and prioritizing the comments and reflection from the stakeholders, from civil society. There is already 2 very important members of civil society in Asia that have contacted me, asked me to have the floor, and I will give the floor to them. I will be monitoring the Q&A section to look at more questions that may come up, try to cluster them and pose them to the panelists for them to respond. If there is time, I may also give the floor live to 1 or 2 of those posing the question. So enough of my voice, we get into the first segment. And I will formulate the same 2 questions to all panelists to make the flow of the session easier. And these 2 questions reflect on the 2 points I made in my introduction. I will ask each of you 4 champions, whom I will introduce one by one, to reflect on the progress. But please, when you reflect on progress in your country, give a particular emphasis to the critical aspect of stakeholder engagement, bringing in the voices, bringing in the input from all the stakeholders in drafting NAPs. In one of the cases, obviously Thailand, the NAP has already been drafted, and I will ask Kun Norilak to reflect on how stakeholders are coming in the implementation. The second point, again, is on how will the NAPs integrate the lessons that were learned during the COVID-19 emergency. So with no further ado, I'd like to give the floor to the first speaker, as Ms. Rabia Javeri Aga, State Secretary of the Ministry of Human Rights in Pakistan. Ms. Rabia, last time we spoke in Islamabad, we had not heard about COVID-19 at all. There were very ambitious plans with tens of stakeholders consultations across Pakistan, and there was a plan at that stage to have a plan announced by the end of the year. I imagine that the crisis must have complicated the process of consultation, but would like to hear from you about progress on NAPs in Pakistan. Rabia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Livio. First, let me begin by thanking you very much for inviting me here, thanking UNDP for their support, and they've been amazing partners to us in this journey. We have reached quite an advanced stage, and we have completed the first draft of the National Action Plan. We started the process with UNDP in October 2018. 3 months later, we had already begun the National Baseline Assessment, which was completed by approximately the end of 2019. Now, the baseline assessment itself was a very comprehensive desk review of Pakistan law, Pakistan policy. It included a survey of about 150 companies. We had approximately 200 stakeholders and about 30 consultations. With UNDP support, we were also able to gather an international perspective. So we visited Bangkok, we visited the Philippines, and the UN working group in Geneva. That was basically to learn the best practices of what is happening in the world and also to share our progress. We have now at the moment also had sufficient stakeholder consultations in 2 provinces, KP and Lahore and Punjab. You may know we have 5 provinces. These have included various tiered level associations, which is talking to the federal government, the provincial government, not all stakeholders, but some stakeholders, talking to the chambers, to the associations, and going right down to the grassroots level to hear a different perspective from different tiers of society, different stakeholders. By the end of 2019, we had done sufficient number of stakeholders, and we were planning to go into meeting with civil society this year, but however, we got stalled with the COVID issue. What we also have been able to do, you were there for the launch in November 2019. What we have been able to in the ministry is now create greater ownership by the government. So we were fortunate the Ministry of Human Rights has now got business and human rights in its development portfolio, which means that when you have something in your development portfolio, you actually have to stand in front of various ministries in the government and pitch your project. This has been pitched and this has been improved in our development portfolio. And now, of course, with all the experience, we have now done the first draft of the National Action Plan. You asked us about how did we get the critical aspect of stakeholder engagement. I think we did, the Ministry of Human Rights had 2 strategies. First of all, we wanted to disseminate information in a highly consultative way and a highly transparent way. The second thing we wanted was create ownership between the stakeholders and us, and by emphasizing a philosophy that we have a shared agenda of positive change and profitability. So if I go into the first thing, when you talk about the consultative process involved, we, as I mentioned, had extensive stakeholder consultations. These were from federal to grassroots. So we were trying to catch all tiers. Of course, there are many more consultations which still need to be done. How did we ensure transparency? First of all, we ensured transparency by an open registration of all our events. We ensured it by a dedicated website for communication. We ensured that business community had access to focal persons in the Ministry of Human Rights. We followed a best practices process by using the toolkit which was developed by the Danish Institute of Human Rights. With technical support of the UNDP, we were able to take the best practices from countries such as Germany, Chile, Kenya, and so on and so forth. The second thing that we did was we were able to communicate, and we were very keen to develop a level of ownership. How were we to bring the stakeholders onto the table with us and ensure them that we were not working in some sort of fluffy philosophical concept, and how the concept of human rights was very much ingrained in also the issue of financial profitability. We had to communicate to the businesses that CSR is not the right approach to social issues, that the human rights canvas is relevant to both the world of ethics and the work of tangible financial returns. Pakistan in the past had a horrible experience with the loss of a Walt Disney order, which is our $200 million, due to poor governance. We had some fires in Baldia, and of course you have the example of the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. And the Pakistani business community is aware of the costs, the financial costs of what was labeled poor governance when the Walt Disney order was withdrawn. And I think that was a very tangible example which told people that, you know, hello, this is not just something that's we're just talking in the air, but this is something that will affect you in the way you do business. And what we wanted to tell the companies was, if you join us, you have a control in your own development. We are building a national action plan. Come on board with us and steer us the way that you think would be best. That you could be a major player in this government policy if you came on to board with us. And that you could use the NAP also in your access to GSP+, because GSP+ also talks about 27 conventions, 7 human rights conventions. And in that, I think we were able to get that kind of synergy from the business community. And we have now pretty much got a large level of buy-in. And that, I think, has been our success. So I think I'm within my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Thank you very much for touching on many important points, including the importance of peer learning. I'm glad that the visit in Thailand was successful, and the issue of peer learning is obviously one of the very objective of these sessions that we are having. Thank you for pointing out the issue of ownership and highlighting the fact that all ministries must come on board. It's an aspect of stakeholder engagement which is often overseen. There is a driving ministry and perhaps efforts to bring in civil society and business, but sometimes the other ministry in the same government are not on board. So I think it is definitely a good thing that the government of Pakistan is doing. You mentioned the website. It's something that I've been pointing to many other governments, colleagues of yours, as a very good example. Having a website, it's a very simple thing to do. If you're transparent and sharing everything there is an opportunity for everyone to connect with that process. I'm sure people connecting from the Danish Institute for Human Rights will be happy that you refer to their good manual, and Dante, who's here with us, will probably be happy to hear that you have also looked at the Chile experience. So thank you, Rabia. Allow me to go to the second panelist. My last field missions before the COVID-19 crisis was this year in Mongolia, which I visited with an invitation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mongolia. COVID-19 had actually already started, and I remember vividly that during that mission, we had a consultation with the working group drafting the NAP in Mongolia, and we were all wearing face masks, something we were not really used to at the time, and we have now become very used. And I'm very thankful for that invitation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mongolia, because I have learned of how the government of Mongolia is looking at ensuring, exactly like you suggested for Pakistan, that all stakeholders are part of this process of drafting the NAP. So to tell us more about this process, I'd like to give the floor to the mastermind of the NAP in Mongolia, Ms. Oyu Basha, who is the head of Human Rights Division at the MFA of Mongolia. Ms. Oyu, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Livio. Thank you for the forum organizers for having me at this session. I would like, first of all, to congratulate the Royal Thai government for the adoption of this National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which is the first of this kind in the region. And it's an inspiration for all of us. And I hope that the National Action Plan team of Mongolia will have an opportunity to learn from your experiences, and also the Pakistani colleagues. Compared with the fellow regional countries which are present at this session, Mongolia is the newcomer. We are in an early stage of developing National Action Plan, I must say. It was the government who initiated developing National Action Plan in response to the recommendations of the United Nations Human Rights mechanisms, particularly the Working Group on Business and Human Rights and the Universal Periodic Review The initiative is led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to which I belong. The ministry established a multi-sectorial and a multi-stakeholder working group, which just Livio mentioned, last year in spring. And the official kickoff event happened in May 2019. And we are very thankful for Dr. Surya Deva from the working group, UN working group, was able to attend the event as a keynote speaker. National Action Plan Working Group involves government, all the ministries of the government and relevant agencies and business networks, non-government organizations and national human rights institution, trade union, court and state-owned enterprises, academia and international organizations. The working group established a small executive committee and we have just developed our roadmap. The government is pleased to see that the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the largest business network of this country, pledged its commitment to the National Action Plan. As to the roadmap, we are planning to complete the baseline study by the end of this year and the National Action Plan itself by the third quarter of 2021. An important point to highlight in this connection is that the parliamentary election is due in 2 weeks' time from today, and the new government will be in full function by September, we expect. So the working group sees that it is very important to reaffirm the National Action Plan commitment and its implementation to the new government policy agenda. In moving forward, the National Action Plan process and engaging the stakeholders in an effective way, the biggest challenge we face is the absence of knowledge and awareness about the business and human rights. Business and human rights is a totally and absolutely a new and unknown subject at all circles, from policy making to business practices and even in academic circle. Responsible business is largely taken by philanthropist way, and the compliance culture is not norm in this country. Secondly, the market segment is very specific, which makes us different from fellow countries in the region. Mining commodity export is the key in the economy. The second biggest in the economy is the agricultural sector, though the largest portion of the workers in this sector is nomadic herders. The presence of multinational companies is limited and only in the mining sector. Thirdly, as we have recently commenced the National Action Plan baseline study, the difficulty is that segregated data and the sources are not available for the use of this study. It may therefore require us to do research and analysis for the purpose of National Action Plan and hold extended validation exercises on the study. In order to ensure effective engagement of all stakeholders to the National Action Plan development, there is an urgent need to implement a serious and intensive capacity building. We have started a conversation with Livio to conduct a tailored coach training in order to prepare coaches for government, business, and the civil society organizations. The NAP team is grateful for UNDP Mongolia's support, which enabled us to hire local expert who is a catalyst in the moving forward baseline study. We do also appreciate Livio and the Business Human Rights Asia program for the advices and the guidance provided. We are all very encouraged by your support. As to the second question you posed, Livio, indeed the current pandemic has taught us all many lessons and stressed the need to prepare well for future pandemics and emergencies. Among others, the important revelation was, I think, that there is a greater need of improving the existing emergency plans and systems in all our countries. Mongolia neighbors with China, and you have just mentioned that it was one of the first countries affected, and the various emergency measures have been taken since mid-January, closure of borders, schools and the businesses, and the border and schools are still closed, and to some extent we opened the businesses. And it was in April when the parliament approved the law of Mongolia to prevent and fight and mitigate the socioeconomic impact of this pandemic. because it was necessary to regulate the issues which are left out from the existing plans and system. I think many countries felt the same need. The new law specified human rights principles which the authorities and the decisions they make must follow throughout the pandemic. It also established rights and responsibilities of economic entities, such as taking protective measures for employees, utilizing information technology to enable them to work from home, and avoid increasing rental fees, inflating prices, and causing artificial scarcity of foods and services, and mitigating negative impact of the pandemic on vulnerable and at-risk population groups. Since the pandemic has started, we saw the cases where the business provided, in fact, the donations to the emergency funds, but at the same time, they are laying off their own employees. So again, here, what we are seeing is a fundamental gap that we need to fill in terms of awareness and the knowledge. And in more practical terms, certainly in our future NAP, it is important to set the standards of human rights due diligence in emergency situations, such as natural disasters and pandemic. The NAP should also require companies to allocate risk fund as a part of risk management on human rights and introduce a permanent flexible work arrangements, including working from home, particularly for those who are most vulnerable. Thank you, Livio. It's all I have now for now.
Thank you, all you. Very, very informative. Thank you very much, especially for making the link between the NAPs and the UPR. Those who know me know that I have a soft spot for linking UPR processes and the National Action Plan. So I'm glad that the National Action Plan will be brought up during the UPR process. Thank you for making specific reference also to the policy that the government of Mongolia is putting in place when it comes to responding to the recovery aspect of the pandemic, and glad to note that the human rights lens is using. It's for the first time I hear, and I hope this will be the concern of many others, that your NAP will be looking at standards specific to time of crisis. I hope and believe Mongolia will not be the first country. Probably be difficult to see any NAP from now that does not have some type of provisions on pandemics or at least emergencies in general. You started, OU, by congratulating the government of Thailand about the adoption of the first NAP in Asia. And this is a news that I believe everyone probably connecting to this session is already aware of. And indeed, in the long process of drafting and then adopting a NAP, Ms. Narilak Pairchayapum, who is the Director of International Human Rights Divisions at the Department of Rights and Liberties Protection of the Ministry of Justice of Thailand, has been the key driver. She's become a little bit of a symbol of what NAPs require. Somehow, the word champion probably applies to her more than anybody else, simply because she started probably before than others. And I do see all the others certainly in this panel and many more following on her footsteps. So I'd like to give the word to Kun Narilak. And obviously in her case, the questions related to stakeholders engagement and COVID-19 had to do with the implementation of the NAP, that it's already been adopted. So in a NAP that has already been adopted and obviously did not have provisions on times of emergency, I'm asking Narilak to elaborate on how is this gap sort of going to be filled. I'm also asking her and taking the liberty to bring also some of the questions that I'm already receiving on the Q&A sessions. There are many people from Thailand requesting for you to elaborate specifically on the chapter of the NAP that has to do with human rights defenders. Narilak, we know that SLAP cases have unfortunately continued also during the time of the pandemic. It is an issue that it's very much discussed here in Thailand. So I would be grateful if, in elaborating on the progress in implementing the NAP, you can give a specific emphasis on human rights defenders and avoiding SLAP cases. The floor is yours, Narilak.
สวัสดีค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Livio. First of all, on behalf of the Royal Thai government, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to the organizer, especially the UNDP, for organizing this virtual forum on responsible business and human rights. And Ministry of Justice is pleased to join hands with UN agencies to be a partner of this event. And we are happy to share Thai experience and status and development of implementation of the NAP. Regarding your first question on the status of NAP, I'm sure that all of you are well aware that Thailand has just adopted the first National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights on 29 October last year, marking Thailand to be the first country in Asia and 23rd country in the world to have a standalone NAP. And the aim of having NAP is to translate the UNGP into practice. Our NAP focused on 4 key priority areas. Lady, usually we call it lady. The first one, LEDI. The first one, L is for labor. E is actually cover the land, commodity, natural resource, and environment. D for human rights defender, and I, which is actually focused on cross-border investment and multinational enterprise. Within the NAP, each area will start from overview of the situation, challenge, action plan, which identify the activities, responsible agencies, time frame, and linkage between national strategy, UNGP, SDG. And the full English version of the NAP is available online on the OSHR website. I would like to emphasize here that the development of the NAP cannot be a success without the cooperation from all the stakeholders. It also cannot be a success if we work alone within the government. The needs and challenges reflect from the various sectors, especially the civil society sectors, is the key to success. In case of Thailand, we spent roughly about 3 years to develop the NAP, and we value the meaningful engagement from the multi-stakeholder. We have tried our best to be inclusive as much as possible throughout the process. From gathering information, drafting, revising the NAP, we have conducted a number of consultations in central level and also at the regional level. And we upload our draft regularly on our website. We upload it for 3 times and even extend deadline to ensure that everyone have a chance to provide input to the NAP. Currently, we are in the first phase of implementing the NAP, and we have created the NAP implementation strategies based on 3 main target groups as follows. First, for the government, we have divided into 2 levels, the central level and provincial level. At central level, we have started by initiating the high-level dialogue with like a bilateral meeting with the relevant ministries. We have discussed with the top executive of that ministry and together with the relevant officers. So far before the COVID, we have been talked with Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Commerce, and Ministry of Industry. The aim of high-level dialogue is to set everyone in the same page. So, and also ensure the correct understanding of the NAP, as well as encourage the concrete implementation and effective implementation of the NAP. As for the provincial level, we also have selected 10 pilot provinces with the combination of the big and small provinces from 5 different regions to find the best model to implement the NAP at the local level. We have first started by introducing NAP to the provincial governors at pilot provinces, together with also talk with the representative from different ministry at the local level and Chamber of Commerce, Industrial Association at the local level to make sure that everyone understands NAP and aware of the importance of the NAP. So far, we have been to Chiang Mai, Phayao, Sukhothai, Songkhla, and we will continue to visit other pilot provinces after the situation returns to normal. The integrated action plan is also currently being developed to categorize between short-term, medium-term, and long-term activities. And the IT system for reporting the implementation of NAP is also being developed to serve as a channel for everyone to easily access and provide input on achievement, as well as challenge of implementing the NAP. Importantly, the subcommittee on driving forward the NAP is being established with the mandate to monitor, follow up, and push forward the implementation of the NAP. Secondly, for the business sector, including state-owned enterprise, a series of training have been conducted and also will be conducted to make sure that the business aware of the NAP. And our aim is also to raise awareness on NAP and encourage the effective implementation. Not only Ministry of Justice is working on raising awareness of the business, National Human Rights Commission of Thailand, State Stock Exchange Commission is also work on educate and raise awareness on business and human rights to the business sector. And we are working in close collaboration with Global Network of Thailand to set up the Business and Human Rights Academy, which will be the regional hub for training on business and human rights in the future. And moreover, we also conduct a cooperative study on appropriate incentive to encourage business to become more responsible and respect human rights. We will propose the study to the cabinet very soon in order to push for the implementation. One more important activities that I want to highlight here is that is called the project called Business and Human Rights Award, because last year the project was quite successful, so we decided to continue every year to encourage the business and state-owned enterprise to use UNGP as a standard for their work and encourage the lead agency to be a good example for their friends. Thirdly, about civil society. We are proud to inform that the NAP is the first official document of Thailand that clearly states about and mention about the human rights defender. One of our duty is to make sure that all sectors understand the role of human rights defender and create constructive dialogue among all sectors. Currently, our department is in collaboration with the UNDP in conducting the comparative study on anti-SLAPP law and also measure to protect human rights defender. And we will invite the CSO for the consultation very soon. And hopefully we will be able to come up with the most appropriate measure to protect human rights defender. And I'm very welcome on all the suggestions in this regard. And I hope that this measure will also, it has to be suited to the Thai context as well. Apart from the three main target groups, we are also working closely with the university to introduce the business and human rights issue, aiming to include them as part of the subject teaching in the university. It can be attached with faculty of law, business school, or even university can just simply initiate the project at the university and initiate the activities to raise awareness on business and human rights to the student. I hope that by learning on business and human rights, the university student, after they leave university and enter into the workforce or enter into the labor market or even start their own business, they can have a sense to learn and link and understand the linkage between business and human rights. As for your second question, I believe that NAP is still be an important policy tool to set government expectation towards business, and also it can be used as a minimum standard for business responsibility for make them to understand and aware of their responsibility, especially in the time of pandemic, where human rights cannot be neglected. NAP can also use to remind business about their core responsibility, not only the responsibility to their own business, but responsibility to others as well. If the business adheres to the standards set in the NAP, it will gain even more trust from their business partner as well as public. And this will result in strengthen their business, increasing income and avoid conflict, and finally create a sustainable business growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Narilak. You went to 1 minute over time, but that's absolutely fine because I added one specific question on the human rights defenders. And thank you for pointing out the plans of the government of Thailand to study deeper the issue of human rights defenders and indeed the issue of the SLAPP cases towards finding a solution to harassment of human rights defenders. You did refer to our country office, the fact that our country office will be working closely with you on that. I want to say from the very beginning that the work on this study should not be and will not be a study of the Minister of Justice and NDP, will be a study in which we hope will be owned by everyone, by the stakeholders that will provide ample opportunity for everyone. And we know there are many that have views and ideas on the issue of human rights defenders and SLAP to come in, work with us all together on this pressing issue in Thailand. Again, thank you, Narilak. Let me move to the next speaker, with Ms. Akiko Sato, Deputy Secretary General of Human Rights Now, and part of the civil society platform for Japan's National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. We have heard about from 3 drivers of NAPs that belong to government institutions. In this case, I wanted to bring in an example of somebody whom I actually know very well from civil society that has been pushing very hard for a NAP in Japan. Sometimes the civil society organization who push very hard for this issue. I know Akiko has been certainly a champion in that regard in Japan. Last time I've heard about from the government of Japan on the NAP was during the Asia session at the Geneva Forum. Some of you might have attended it, where the government of Japan informed us of a NAP hopefully being issued before the Olympic Games. We know that the Olympic Games were postponed because of COVID-19. I don't know whether so will be the NAP of Japan. I'm asking you, Akiko, to give us a perspective from civil society on progress so far on the drafting of the NAP in Japan, and indeed include references to policy work that the government of Japan is working on in relation to the time of COVID-19. The floor is yours, Akiko.
Thank you, Livio. Thank you for the warm introduction. And thanks to the organizer for having me here. Good afternoon, and maybe good morning and good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be here with these distinguished panelists. So let me begin with sharing the current status of Japanese NAP, as asked by Livio. So when the discussion started in 2018, NAP was scheduled to be released around this month, at least by Tokyo Olympic, but due to COVID-19, same as Tokyo Olympic was postponed, the process of our NAP itself has been suspended as well. So far, what we have seen is a first draft of the NAP. We stakeholders, who are also members of the working group of the NAP, have submitted 2 requests of letters to the government in order to emphasize our common interests. Although coming from different sectors, we could agree upon some points to be addressed in the coming NAP. In particular, we pointed out the importance of incorporating increasing effect by COVID-19 into the NAP in the second letter, which was actually submitted last week. So these letters are available in English on the website of ILO Tokyo office, so please have a look at them. It was April of 2019 when the advisory committee and the working group were established by the government to discuss the details of the NAP after the baseline study was released in 2018. The stakeholders comprised of the working group includes the Keidanren, the largest business federation in Japan, a representative of SME, Global Compact Network Japan, the trade union, CSO, an investor, ILO, and the Bar Association. So since only limited participants were allowed to join it, CSO established the CSO network on NAP, of which a number of NGOs working on diverse human rights topics are members, so that we would bring a wider range of voices from the ground. In addition, relevant ministries attended the meetings with the working group as well, but mainly Ministry of Foreign Affairs has taken the initiative in the process here in Japan. The members of the advisory committee are also those from some different sectors. So while the working group attended the meetings 4 times, we were also supported by international community like Dante, Anita from the UN working group, and also the Christina from OECD visited us in Japan and gave us very helpful suggestions. Last July, on the basis of the discussion on the working group and advisory committee, 5 prioritized areas as well as 14 elements were selected for embodying NAP by the government. 5 prioritized areas included awareness raising within both relevant agencies and the entire society, supply chain issues inside and outside Japan, and remedial mechanism. Then February this year, the first NAP draft was released for public comment. So this is a kind of the official roadmap that the government has set up, but actually we stakeholders think that this is not enough to embed business and human rights into policies and practice in our society. So apart from it, we stakeholders have had the meetings for several times to explore how we could work collectively for an effective NAP. As a result, we agreed to submit the first letter of request the last November to the government. In this letter, we asked to consider practical measurements for disclosure of non-financial information, foreign workers, human rights due diligence, public procurement, and access to remedy. Then, as I introduced at the beginning, the second letter was just submitted. So now it is expected that perhaps Japanese NAPs could be the first NAP after we experience the devastating influence of COVID-19. Therefore, we think it is really crucial to reflect what has been exposed under the current situation to our NAP being formulated. In this second letter, the first will reconfirm what we requested in the first letter because the first NAP draft doesn't seem to take them into consideration enough. Then we highlight the importance of putting tangible measurements of development when it comes to its implementation, monitoring, and update of NAP. Regarding COVID-19, we indicated some major impacts that found out until now, such as increased unemployment, harsh working conditions, particularly for those that were in vulnerable situation, and discriminatory treatment of non-regular and foreign workers, and so on and so forth. Although the current draft doesn't specify the existing gap that we have demanded, unfortunately, the crisis caused by the COVID-19 has revealed it from UNGP perspective. So COVID-19 has made it very clear that conducting the human rights due diligence is significant to overcome social injustice and inequality, which actually means that private sector could contribute to reconstructing the society for the sake of the people. We highly emphasize how significant it is to incorporate this aspect to their coming up. In addition, I feel there is the inconsistency among their other concepts like SDGs, ESGs, and also now the concept like a green recovery, which have become more and more common and popular among the business sector, but they must be implemented in line with the UNGP. So to conclude the presentation, I'd like to end with the hope regarding the role of multi-stakeholder initiative engagement during the NAP process. So as I introduced briefly, while taking part in the process, stakeholders are given opportunities to get to know each other more closely and discuss business and human rights related topics more openly, which really help us delve into the nature of UNGP. I believe this connection itself is a rich fruit of the process. So regarding the content of the NAP, if the government that takes the comments provided by the stakeholders seriously, I believe it could be the meaningful tool for changing the mindset of the business community as well as policymakers. So COVID-19 has shown us an unexpected future, but it is time for all of us to rethink what business and human rights means and how stakeholders to come up with the collective actions for the building back better. So thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Akiko. And with that reflection on the possibility to rethink and build back better, I'm sure we'll hear a lot from Dante when I give him the floor. Little disappointing, I must say, to hear that the process of drafting an app in Japan is stalled, but I do count on civil society, Keidan and many other actors, as I'm sure including the government, to restart the process very soon. This concludes the interventions from the 4 champions. I'm just flagging to all the 4 champions 2 or 3 questions that I found most common in the chat. I think you all have access to that, by the way, so that you can reflect on them. And if I have an opportunity to come back to you at the end for 1 minute, so you can maybe select one of those and reply. So we're receiving questions on the importance of NAP oversight mechanisms. Narilak mentioned a little bit of that. I'll ask you to maybe talk a little bit about the issue of oversight of the implementation of the NAP. I'm receiving a question on SOEs, role of state-owned enterprises and the importance of them leading by example. So please reflect on that if I have time to come back to you. And there's a question asking whether COVID-19 has decreased or increased interest in NAP in the countries where you are operating. Reflect a little bit on that, and hopefully I'll be able to come back to you on that. But let me now move to the second segment, where we had 2 high-level speakers that we're honored to have with us today. I'm sure your points have inspired both of them. I'd like to start with Ambassador Pirkka Tapiola, EU ambassador here in Thailand. Ambassador Tapiola, the presence of the EU in the NAP session is very relevant, and it's because, as many know, the very concept of NAPs, National Action Plans, came from a recommendation of the EU Commission, I believe in 2012 or 2013, and it was then picked up by the UN Working Group and turned into a global recommendations that many have followed. There's a second reason why the presence of the EU is very relevant in this panel, is because the EU has been promoting and supporting the drafting of NAPs in Asia, first through the government of Sweden, one member state, and I'll take the opportunity of thanking the government of Sweden for the support that they're giving to UNDP, which was translated into support to countries in the region. But then again, the EU also came in with a specific project on supporting business and human rights in Asia that has a strong focus on NAPs. Both Sweden and EU are in fact supporting this very forum, and I take the opportunity to thank you, Ambassador, and thank the government of Sweden on behalf of all the organizers.
Pleasure.
So the floor is yours, Ambassador Tapiola.
Right, thank you, Livio. Let me start by congratulating the Royal Thai government for having adopted the National Action Plan and encouraging and marking the efforts of other governments in Asia in that direction. And let me also join you in underlining that it's important that the COVID-19 pandemic does not slow down this process. It should rather speed it up, because if we've seen anything as of late, we have seen how much human vulnerability we have over there and how important it is to tackle human vulnerability also in the workplace. And for instance, migrant workers are a very good example of that. Now, that if I go to sort of our overall approach to business and human rights and to national action plans, and to the whole idea of regulating the responsibility of the business sector vis-a-vis human rights and, for instance, environmental standards, let me start with the concept before talking about the sort of regulating part of popular will and of demand. One shouldn't underestimate the power we all have as citizens and as consumers. And I think that you see more and more around the world, this globalized world, which I believe will remain globalized even after the pandemic, that people, consumers, want to know that the products they are consuming have been produced in an ethical manner, whether it's in terms of labor standards, or whether it is in terms of environmental standards. And I think it's quite incredible also because the business sector is very much aware of this, and that's why I'd say that we have, for instance, European business very strongly on board. It is quite telling that whenever there is a question on the sort of on supply, on there being a challenge somewhere down the supply chain, it is the business companies and it's the retailers who will very quickly come in and say, hey, is this a problem? And I know that embassies are asked about this. And now, these principles are treaty-based as well. We are committed to promoting them both domestically and in our external relations. We don't just regulate, which sounds far too coercive, but we also find the right mix of binding and voluntary measures. We want to support and encourage companies, which I'd say are very much on board. We help them, we provide incentive, so we raise awareness, and when necessary and appropriate, there is the legislative part. Now we have a solid body of legislation, for instance, imports of timber, conflict, diamonds, minerals. These are fields where we have to do very strong due diligence, and I'll get a bit further to that in a moment. And there is also now a new initiative on sustainable corporate governance. And this is what we call the Commissioner Reinders initiative, where our Justice Commissioner, in fact, has put out there a strong initiative on examining options for regulating due diligence, both in companies' own operations and through their supply chains across sectors. Here again, fantastically good news, 70% of business respondents who have been consulted agree that EU-level rules of due diligence may bring benefits to their business. So this shows how we have all stakeholders on board. Now, it's also clear that we are working on trade agreements as a platform, trade and sustainable development chapters in our trade agreements. And for instance, we've had now free trade agreements in the region with Vietnam, we've had one with Singapore, we hope to go back to negotiations with Thailand. This is going to be a very fundamental requirement from our end and a very clear part. And as said, we are working on voluntary measures and cooperation projects. You already mentioned the project on business and human rights, covering India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, and the complementarity with the government of Sweden. Now, we are also working globally on an Ecuador-led discussion on a UN legally binding instrument on business and human rights. So, I mean, I can only underline the importance of all of this work which is being done. The pandemic is also showing how interlinked everything is and how important it is to work on the ethical standards of business. And let me also note, moving to the environmental standard part, that our growth strategy is still the European Green Deal, which is going to be our growth strategy, also out of the recovery strategy out of the current pandemic. So we will not leave our ethics standards behind, but continue focusing even more actively on them. And therefore, I think that for the global economy to work, we really need to continue working together in bringing this synergy between the private sector and the state sector, in looking at supply chains, the ethical standards which go into that, including ensuring that that business and human rights go hand to hand, and that environmental standards are not left behind. And I know that I'm coming to the end of my time, so I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. We will not leave our ethic principles behind. That's a very powerful statement that I think summarizes everything that you have said, Ambassador. And I thank you for that. Thank you for pointing to the powers of citizens, of consumers, and their demand for products that they purchase to be produced in an ethical manner. You made reference to Commissioner Reinders, and I take the liberty to remind him, to those who have not spotted yet in the program, is a recent but very, very welcome addition to our program. Commissioner Reinders has kindly agreed to make a statement on his initiative, what you refer to, I'm learning now, to Commissioner Reinder's initiative, right? Something that is owning on the plan to have environmental and human rights mandatory due diligence. The statements that he made already on the media has attracted a lot of attention from all of us practitioners in the business and human rights world. I'm sure all of us will want to know more from him on that. So I'm suggesting everyone to tune in into the session on human rights due diligence and COVID-19, where this will be broadcasted. It will be tomorrow at 1:30 Bangkok time. I'll move quickly, while thanking you again, Ambassador, to the second speaker that we're very honored to have here. Again, somebody who doesn't need presentation. Dante Pesce, you've been a major driving force of organizing with us and together with your colleague Surya, the forums in Asia. And we know that the UN Working Group has also already started reflections on the next decade of the UNGPs. The UN Guiding Principles are turning 10 in one more year. I think 16 will be one more year to go. So the reflection has already started, and we're very happy as UNDP to have been already in that discussions with you. And I know you will be reflecting with us and many others for one entire year on the future of business and human rights. So I'm going to ask you to reflect in the context of the future of business and human rights on the national action plans, which is the focus of this session. So how do you see the national action plans also evolving towards the next decade? Dante, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Livio. And but a friendly reminder that you also asked me to make a connection with COVID-19 and the pandemic crisis. So,
absolutely.
So prepare a little bit of comments on that. First of all, thank you for the invitation again. I would have liked to be in Bangkok again, and of course many familiar faces among the panelists. So that's great, and congratulations for the presentations and the organization. Hopefully in the near future we'll be able to go again to Asia, planning late this year, and of course next year I hope it will be a little bit more normal than now. The first reflection that I want to make is that we are moving from a health crisis to a social and economic crisis, and overall a human rights crisis. And we need to think into the future, into building a better future. So building back better is a better future for all, and of course not leaving anyone behind, etc. And I want to make one first reflection is that this health crisis is showing our strengths and weaknesses at the global level, at the regional level, at the national level, and is becoming a sort of an acid test for resilience, for the capacity of our society overall and our governments as let's say the ones that have the obligation to lead our societies, to be able to prevent, mitigate, and respond to this particular crisis. But it's just a reminder that the business and human rights agenda is built on the same institutional infrastructure. So is the same government and is the same civil society and the same business. So what I will suggest to do is to review and look at the response to this crisis, how good or bad it is, and the weaknesses and the strengths showed in the response to the crisis as the foundations, as the basis for a good development of an action plan, let's say a policy framework, but also good implementation of that policy framework, because our weaknesses will show up eventually anyway, and our strengths are the ones that we need to reinforce and build on top of that. So the crisis, being a terrible experience with so many dead people and so many, let's say, people suffering, gives us in this conversation the opportunity to evaluate our capacity as a society to work together around common objectives. And is our government living up to the expectations? Are our business community living up to the expectations? Is our society overall able to get together and to be on the same boat or on the same side to let's say, to respond to the crisis, but also rebuild and look into a future together? So I think from, let's say, a very negative starting point, the reality that we're facing, I like to see it as an opportunity to learn of what is our institutional capacity to respond, because it's the same institutional capacity that will have to respond to anything else looking into the future. If we look about, let's say, if we talk about, let's say, equality or disparities or climate change or sustainable development overall, etc. The next thing is that the solutions that we need to look at into the future. The National Action Plan is nothing else than a tool that allows government to set expectations, to have a process that is participatory. I will not go into that. It was well described before. And at the end, it's an opportunity to look after solutions for societal problems and for societal gaps. So we need for that to look after solutions. We need two key elements for, in my view: good governance, how we organize ourselves in order to address societal challenges together as a team, as a coalition, as a society overall, and any kind of response to the crisis now on health, but actually the climate change crisis that is of equal or even greater magnitude, or the, let's say, the respect for human rights at the end, at the center of any kind of future for this, for our humanity, requires legitimacy, requires a collective action that is built on participation, on inclusiveness, on equal footing, etc. And the last point that I want to say is about the future. And you mentioned, Livio, that we will start a process on July 1st with a kickoff actually July 7th, with the support actually of the German government and under their presidency of the EU at the same time, but also some other governments are stepping in to evaluate the first 10 years of the implementation of the guiding principles, a stock-taking exercise to learn what we have done well and where are our opportunities for improvement and where our major, let's say, failures are, if there are significant failures. I will say that overall we're making progress, and you all know progress on pioneer level, on starting point, but we need to speed up and to scale up and to normalize respect for human rights by business. And for that sake, we will evaluate the first 10 years, but we'll also be building a process towards the next decade and beyond. A process that is participatory, that is inclusive. We're going to be making all the announcements actually this current week, making calls for engagement, etc. And we're looking into a future where we have a strong component on global governance and how we connect dots and how we harmonize and create synergies, let's say with the climate change agenda, with the health agenda, public health agenda, with the SDGs, and with many other agendas that we need to put them under as a common umbrella if we want to actually make progress on scale and speed. And the second element is that we're going to be pushing into global implementation. And for the global implementation to work, as I said before, regarding the national action plans, we will have a sort of global action plan in which we need that plan, that roadmap, to be legitimate. And for that to happen, we need to engage with all stakeholders from all around the world to capture their voice, to be able to include their perspectives. And as we look into that future, we will like to be way more ambitious in terms of building from where we are right now, understanding our challenges better, our gaps, our obstacles, and addressing them strategically and in a very participatory and inclusive manner. So we will be making this invitation to the whole world. And of course, Livio and the UNDP and all your team is going to be very, let's say, functional to this process. We have a very strong partnership there. But that is the reflection that I wanted to share. The same challenges that each one of you face at the national level, we face it at the global level. And as you address and find solution, innovations, creative approaches, and how to deal with the challenges, the same speaks to the global level, and where we will be making a concerted effort, building a coalition behind much greater ambition, looking into the next decade to come, and the next decades to come, from clarifying expectations and setting goals and targets to moving into more the arena of mandatory, let's say a smart mix of measures and trying to normalize what today is more in the sphere of pioneers and the level of pioneers. But of course, we need to work together with all the pioneers to think together in how can we be ambitious into the next decade and decades to come. Thank you again for the invitation and congratulations for the great work that you're doing in the context of Asia. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dante, for the encouragement. Very excited, of course, to hear about the plans to look at the roadmap, the global action plan for business and human rights, as you called it, and certainly honored personally and on behalf of UNDP to be in this process with you. This concludes the global reflections, and some may actually reflect on your reflections. I want to now move to giving the floor to some stakeholders that have already requested to speak. Before I do that, let me go into some questions that I'm receiving here to the chat to acknowledge them, and again pose them to the panelists in case they want to reflect, and whether I will be able to go back to them to respond. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the message from Sulakshana Lumumba from Protection International that is pointing out that since 2014, Protection International reported that over 440 women and men, I believe, human rights defenders have faced charges. And obviously, this is pointing out again the point we made earlier on the importance of protecting human rights defenders. There is an open letter requesting all to work together on ending the suffering of these human rights defenders. And certainly on behalf of all the organizers, I want to express support to this statement and acknowledgement and sympathy again over the suffering of these defenders, the ending of which requires concerted and joint action that obviously includes all of us. There's also another question that asks about specific gender components in NAPS. And again, I'll ask those talking about NAPS to come back to that if I'll have a chance. But before I give the floor back to the panelists, let me make sure there are at least 2 or 3 more contributions from the floor. There are 2 that have already contacted me before the seminar and have asked for the floor, so I'm happy to give the floor to them as a priority. I hope Dory can open the mic for Ms. Chanda Thapa, Deputy Secretary General of the Asia Indigenous People Pact. Chanda, the floor is yours. I don't hear Chanda at the moment. Perhaps while Dory is working on Chanda, I can ask a second civil society member that asked me to also speak, who is Kunsor Ratnami Polka, Executive Coordinator of Community Resource Center. I hope that Sor can hear me and her mic can be unmuted. So Sor can come in and then I'll give the floor to Chanda. Please, Chanda, prepare for it. Sor, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for invitation. I actually hearing from the panelists, and also I have to say congratulations for the Thai government for adopting the National Action Plan. Anyhow, because of we are working closely to follow how the National Action Plan implement for our apply, and we realize that because of after the adoption, the COVID-19 has come, then it's also difficult for the civil society to engage any kind of the implementation. Anyhow, I would like to raise up for the 2 things that I realized that even we have a national action plan, the problem is national action plan is just only the policy of the government. It's no any enforcement. Then it seems like it's for volunteer for every stakeholder to adopt national action plan to implement it. Even from the government, we found that a lot of state agencies not understand what is the national action plan, and when I talk to them, they used to ask, "What is that?" I never heard this. This is very difficult to see how the implementation of national action plan will move forward. That it will be hard for Ms. Nalilak to work on that with the government agency, and also with the stakeholder as like a business sector. It's also, I realize that it's become the national action plan or business and human rights. If they use in the other way, it will be the propaganda of the business. But if they can make it properly, respect, and also try to implement according to the UN guiding principle, it will be very good for the starting. Anyhow, a lot of CSO, especially with the NGO, we have there are a lot of questions that business and human rights, UN guiding principle or national action plan will make the business better, not make the human right better. Then how we can make this one together? Because I also realize that even when we talk about the slap case in Thailand nowadays, the trend of the business using the slap to harass for the human rights defender, and it's a lot of cases. One company filed the lawsuit to the community for 20 cases, or filed the lawsuit against the human rights defender for over 20 cases. How it can be done? We have to make not only understanding for the stakeholder, not to make understanding for the judge, for the business, and for the civil society, but we have to make the regulation. We have to make a law and make it to ensure that the development of the business and human rights to be protected, and the matter is a human right, not the business. Then lastly, if we want to make this kind of thing happen, the public participation for the development and also implementation of the national action plan is most important. How the CSO, how all the stakeholders engage with the implementation. Otherwise, the implementation will be making by the state agency. They're making a law, they're making a regulation, but it's not payroll to protect the people. For example, lastly, we have the mining law implementation. We have recommendation about that, but when the revise of the law is not for protecting the people, but it make the mining easier to get the license. Then how we can maintain and make balance between the promote the business to good development, but how that good development protect and respect the human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Sor. Very, very, very good contribution. Thank you. I think your message was heard loud and clear. You're obviously very competent about the issues that you've been pointing out on slap cases, on human rights defenders. I'd like to acknowledge also the letter that we have received from ETO Watch today. We count definitely on your points, your experience, the work that incredible work the CRC is doing on the ground to inform the next steps that not only the government of Thailand but also UNDP for the extent that we'll be able to support is planning to do on human rights defenders and SLAP cases. I'm told that Chanda has a problem in connecting at this stage, so I'd like to give the floor to another speaker that has requested the floor, and I hope Dori can connect Ms. Lu Hong Lee, who is the Deputy Head of Civil Division within the Ministry of Justice, Civil and Economic Law Department of the government of Vietnam. So Ms. Lee, you have the floor.
Good morning. Well, for Vietnam, I'm happy to announce that in earlier May this year, the Ministry of Justice of Vietnam has signed an LOA with the United Nations Development Programme on the implementation of the project Advancing Responsible Business Conduct in Vietnam, when UNDP serves as implementing partner. The goal of this project is threefold. First is to increase the awareness on responsible business conduct related on commercial law and policy and application of relevant international standards among key stakeholder groups, including the government agencies and business sector in Vietnam. Second is to collect opinions, feedback, and insights from key stakeholder groups on the ways forward. And third is to support development of a roadmap for advancing responsible business practices in Vietnam, grounded in the relevant international standards and frameworks. And in accordance with the LOA with UNDP this year, we will carry out two activities. The first one is a consultation workshop on the review and on developing a roadmap for a national framework strategy to advance responsible business practice in Vietnam, including laws and policies relating to the commercial sector in Vietnam. And the second thing is to organize a focus group discussion for relevant ministries and agencies on advancing responsible business practice in Vietnam, including main government institutions, as well as selected business and industry leaders, legal experts, and academics to share knowledge, expertise, and practices in the preparation of policies related to responsible business practice, and to collect insights for development of the roadmap on advancing responsible business practice in Vietnam. Thank you. Back to you, Livio.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Thank you for bringing this strong policy commitment to the forum. We take note of that. Of course, as far as UNDP is concerned, thank you for pointing to our partnership. I see my colleagues there in the back, and let me take an opportunity to say hello to them. I know that they've been working very hard with you and the Minister of Justice of Vietnam on the responsible business work there. We do look forward to engage with you, and perhaps in the next opportunity, give you an opportunity to update us on the progress of the ambitious plan that you had just highlighted. I'm hoping to give the floor to Chanda. I hope the technical issue was resolved. So let me try if Chanda from the AIPP, the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, can speak. Chanda, floor is yours. I'm sorry, it doesn't seem to be working. I am kindly asking her if unfortunately, okay.
Hello.
Okay, is it that Chanda?
Yes, Livio. Hi.
Chanda, glad that you're live. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Livio, for the invitation. Sorry, there was some technical, I think, problem. For this invitation to join this distinguished panelist and share some reflections from indigenous people's perspective. Listening to this panelist, I think it's quite good to hear about the process and progresses in like different countries, and also quite encouraging to hear the
I am sorry to acknowledge that we might have lost Chanda
Hello?
again. Maybe she's back. Chanda,
Yes. Can you hear me?
you're back. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Should I start from the beginning?
Yes, please, quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you again for this invitation to join these distinguished panelists and also share some of my reflection from the indigenous people's perspective. It's also quite good to hear the different processes being implemented by different countries and also the progress, and also quite encouraging for us to hear the emphasis being given to the engagement and also the collaboration with this with the civil society organization, different stakeholders, including academic institutions. But it's quite unfortunate that this global pandemic has also affected the development process of NAP in different countries. So I'll be just briefly highlighting about indigenous peoples. If you see the representation of indigenous peoples in Asia, so it covers almost like 70% of the 4 million indigenous peoples in Asia. But most of the countries are not recognizing them as indigenous people. So no matter how wonderfully, beautifully the policies, plans, and strategies are formulated, the non-recognition status of IPs really limit to get the benefit out of it. So, and it also it excludes the recognition of their collective rights, specifically as indigenous people. So this has been one of the biggest challenges whenever we discuss about different policies, like these plans and the engagement of indigenous peoples in the implementation processes. So it's very, very important for the state to recognize the status as well as engage them and recognize their rights in these policy documents. So linking that with the pandemic, current pandemic. So anyways, indigenous communities are hugely impacted by the operations of businesses, these mega projects in the name of development. And most of the projects are like running, operated in the indigenous communities, indigenous lands and their territories. And this has really violated their rights as indigenous peoples and their rights to land, territories and resources. And the recent this COVID like outbreak has multiplied the impact and severity among indigenous communities. So we can already see that a lot of new projects are being approved to be operated, and then that has led to land grabbings, and also like in different countries including Cambodia, Philippines, Malaysia. So despite this pandemic happening, the government are still allowing more increase of the operation of the projects, mining companies, and that is also without any like proper environmental impact assessments, without proper free, prior and informed consent from the impacted communities. For example, Philippines government has aggressively like expanded this mining, logging, oil exploration, energy plants and infrastructure projects deep into the forests and indigenous territories, and transnational corporations have also advanced their agenda over this indigenous land. And moreover, the international financial institutions have constantly financing these projects. So these has heavily, like impacted the rights of indigenous peoples. In Malaysia also, our indigenous communities have been fighting and then opposing the government's plan to proceed with Bailey Dam construction amidst this pandemic. And this has also led to, I think, our speaker, I think, stress about the importance of the priorities that Thailand has laid out as a human rights defenders, like in the NAP. But one of the biggest challenges that human rights defenders, specifically indigenous human rights defenders, are facing is the threats from different, like level, different sectors, like trump up charges, defamation, like also the extrajudicial killings are happening for defending their rights. So as I already mentioned, so FPIC, the free, prior, informed consents are only limited to the consultation, and it's not leading to the consent of the communities where these things are happening. So how we ensure the, like the due diligence of human rights, and then these processes are well followed, are another, like key important factors for the state and also the business companies. So in relation to the access to remedy through state-based judicial mechanisms, in the context of human rights, harms caused by natural resource extraction and infrastructure projects is generally ineffective due to insignificant and like practical legal obstacles that they face while attempting to access courts. So this is also because of the lack of capacity and then awareness among the indigenous communities. So that's also, I think, a massive level of awareness and capacity level, capacity needs should be fulfilled, like while, implementing this process or while developing this NAP at different countries. So in the consultation process, I think in the context of business, so I'm already again emphasizing on the FPICs are not being recognized, and it's very much limited to consultation, allowing IPs to self-determinate, not allowing IPs to indigenous peoples to self-determine sustainable development. So in the context of Thailand, I think congratulations once again to Thai government for being the pioneer in developing the National Plan of Action, where indigenous peoples group also heavily engaged in this whole process, like 3 years, that's what was mentioned. But we still feel that this consultation process, the feedbacks that have been provided by these affected communities or particularly indigenous communities were not well reflected in the National Plan of Action. So that's why we are still very much skeptic that how this National Plan of Action will ensure or safeguard, protect the rights of indigenous peoples, where it's about their right to self-determination, right to land, territories, and resources. Because the NAP has only highlighted ethnic minorities, so that really limits to the rights of indigenous peoples to be ensured by this the policy document. So still there are like many projects being implemented in Thailand, like the Omkoi, this mining, coal mining, a project, and also there is recent one, the dam project in Tak province. So these are all being implemented and then operated in the current indigenous communities, impacting heavily on their health, environment, and their rights. So I think I have to end here because my question would be more on like how you really, because this is one of the very important tools, and how we use this tool to really ensure, protect the rights, protect the human rights and the rights to land, territories, and resources, and have access, and appropriate remedies to the affected communities. So that's from my side, because it's very appreciable that governments in Asia have their commitment to development of NAP, and then also already started the process, and also very good to have this, effective and full participation of all stakeholders. As Rabia mentioned, that the ownership is very important of all the stakeholders. Ownership is very important. So that's why we highly request and then recommend the government to be more sensitive towards the not only inclusion but effective and full participation of these communities, including like appropriate and timely communication, not only in the language that is like mainstream language, but also in the local language, so that it can be accessible, including this other processes of engagement. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chanda. Many very good points made by you. I hope everyone has taken note. I'm very happy to end this webinar with the free, prior, and informed consent, a principle that the importance of which cannot be stressed enough, and it's not cannot be stressed enough, the importance of just not making it a principle and a statement, but to actually ensure that it is implemented. So your points are very well taken. I would have loved to go back to all the panelists to give answers, but the time really is up. And in any case, 1 minute would have probably not be sufficient, and it would have just gone into statements that we can all assume would be, of course, of agreement with the questions made. I do hope, though, that the panelists, especially those from government officials, take on board the points made, the question made, and translate them into action. As far as UNDP is concerned, we are working with all of them. So we certainly commit to be working towards resolving and answering to all these very relevant questions made. So let me just thank very much everyone for attending. First, we've had a very large group of people attending. Thanking all the panelists, apologizing for not having been able to bring more people on board with their questions. But for all of you, for your information, all the questions were shared with the panelists and hopefully again will be translated into actions, which I'm sure was the purpose of those who posed the question. I'll end there, and I wish you all a lunch break for those who are in the Bangkok time zone, and connect please with the sessions that will come next. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.